All right, good evening, everyone. It's 6 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is June 3rd, 2024, and it is our workshop meeting. Lori, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sartori.
Here.
Councilmember Brandon. Councilmember Painter.
Here.
Councilmember French.
Here.
And the first item on the agenda tonight is a follow-up discussion on the residential parking study. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mayor. So back in the budget process, we approved for a parking study to be done, and we targeted 3 different residential, multifamily residential areas. I can't remember which exactly month we brought that back to council for discussion in a workshop format. As part of that, we discussed loading zones and maybe some guest parking. There were some recommendations. I have a quick slide just to talk about those. The first part of this is the commercial and the office uses are already part of our code. We already require those. There's no changes to that. What really led this conversation was the multifamily residential, and so what we're recommending is at least 1 space in the multifamily residential for loading. Currently, we do not have that in our code, as you guys know, with Amazon and construction and other stuff. I think it's important that we have that in there. Does have to meet the requirements of this, meaning it has to be on site, parking along the right of way, we can't do that, and then parking on other properties. And so if there's a variance that's required, it would have to make sure it doesn't have those 3 items, so it couldn't be a disruption to the parking on site and right of way and other properties. The other part of the that's teed up for discussion will be the guest parking. Right, currently our code is silent to it in the multifamily, but the guest parking, the draft recommendation, single families 2 spaces, duplex 2 spaces per dwelling unit. The multifamily, we're recommending 2 spaces per dwelling unit and a quarter guest space per dwelling unit. Shall be open to the public and not located inside the parking garage if there is one. And so those are the two main topics for discussion for you guys tonight. I'll do my best to answer any questions, but Trent from Bowman Group is here, or Bowman Company is here, and he helped develop the code with our staff, and so he can answer some questions about how we got here.
Yeah. All right, council.
Just have one quick question. I'm sure I'll come up with some others. And thank you, first of all. What is the significance of the not in the parking garage? Is it because they're usually secured, or the height?
Right, so the village actually has a development that currently where all of the parking is behind garage doors that require residents to access. Okay. So there's physically no way for the guests to even get to it if there were guest parking.
So this isn't talking about, like, is this referring to like a parking garage or like a garage?
Any garage that would have doors or gates that prevent the public from accessing it.
Okay, I'm sure I'll come up with something else, but I'm good for now.
So should that be maybe like just to stay on subject before we move to something else, should it possibly say behind a secure gate too? Because we could have a condition where it's not maybe a parking garage, but there's like security gates that people can't get through. So I don't know if maybe just to something more general to encompass any kind of parking that's secured. Restricted access. Thank you. Good 2 words there.
Yeah, we can work with staff to come up with the wording that allows the public to get there, but can also have the security that you're talking about. So there could be a gate, but it would have to be a manned gate or some way for guests to be able to get through that security.
But the parking would, I'm just trying to understand because I missed part of that question. The parking would still be, but the parking would still be just for the resident parking, meaning like the guest resident. You're not talking about opening that parking up to the public. So maybe the language could just be on private property, right?
Instead of restricted access, you're saying private property.
Right, because I mean, if you're starting to, is every residence going to have a gate then? Or is it, I mean, that's what you'd be requiring, because every residence would have to have guest parking. So you'd have to.
I guess I'm
just trying to understand it. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
I guess I'm visualizing like a big multi-family development development that has just one big parking garage that serves the whole property. And in many cases, they do throw a visitor in there, but if,
Maybe the key is to word it just to make sure that the general public can access the guest spaces.
Okay.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, because I mean, this kind of came up on Beach Road, because we have Sea Glass, and then there's 2 more being built that they have like 2 or 3 guest spots, but then everything else is behind secured.
Yeah.
And so, you know, by their word, they're saying, oh, we'll organize it and deal with it, but like, who's to know for sure if that's gonna happen? So
I get it.
I wanna be careful how we word it, that it doesn't allow them to tell us that they'll manage it.
Absolutely.
You know, we don't know after the fact what's gonna happen.
There was also one other, I think, recommendation in your staff report that I liked, and you guys can discuss it, but also, besides the one, loading, unloading, that also there's some language in there that allows for the staff to make additional recommendations to council to consider. So that way it gives us a little bit of teeth. So, because, you know, like one spot for 60 units is much different than one spot for 330. So if we feel like there's a need based on, you know, whatever the particular development is, we can make some additional recommendations to council, and that gives us in that code to do that. So we'd like to make that recommendation as well to insert into that code.
And correct me on that if I'm wrong, it looked like we were going towards the higher end of guest spaces and spaces in general than some of the other municipalities. And that's what I liked about this, is that we kind of rounded up, let's say. But you're saying, I didn't completely understand what you're saying. If there's 300, 600, it would have fluctuated with the formula.
For the guest parking, yes, it's gonna fluctuate. I was talking about like the loading zone
Oh, I'm sorry,
discussion
okay.
too, is
I
that,
understand.
I think it was this slide, and, require additional loading spaces in multifamily residential during the site plan, we can make
Okay.
additional, so that way, because I think the guest parking is gonna take care of itself depending on the size, but maybe one loading zone for 330 units may not be enough. That, you know, if staff sees something in there, we can make additional recommendation and allow us in the code to do that.
That makes
So I
sense.
think the difference is the code, proposed code here, they would have to get a variance, this alternate recommendation, which is not what we have written here. It's up to, you know, staff recommendation and council discretion.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a formula for that that would make it more even keeled, where it wasn't coming back in front of council each time, or do we want that to come back?
For the loading zone?
Yeah.
Well, loading zone through the site plan process, you're gonna see that. So it comes to you anyways, and so when we come to site plan, staff may recommend, you know, 3 loading spaces to you guys, and you guys would approve that in the site plan, or if the developer goes, we didn't want 3, we only wanted, you know, we only agreed to 2, you guys will make that determination, so you guys see that in the site plan process.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll, you know, we'll obviously have a lot of conversation with the developer prior to just showing up and us asking for some, you know, requirement that they didn't know about, so.
So, Trent, what's more common there? I mean, what have you seen around other municipalities with loading zone? Do they typically require it and the applicant can, you know, apply for a variance? Or have you seen it where it's up to discretion of staff and council?
Well, excuse me, I mean, not all jurisdictions have a requirement to have one, but when they do, it's usually have the requirement, and then you can relax it if you want to. If you start off without, you know, with the baseline of 0 and then require it if needed, then you're gonna have a lot more kicking and screaming, and, you know, the precedence will be 0, and that's what you're gonna hear over and over again. But Jeremy is talking about even another layer of that where, okay, if you're requiring a minimum of 1, but staff can even ask for more, right? And I think the key would be to have the word minimum of 1 in there. So it's a lot easier to require it and then give a variance to take it away than it is to have 0 and then say, no, this time we want you to do it.
Yeah, I'm agreeable with that, Mayor. I'd like to make sure that we do have the requirements in there. I'm comfortable with, I like the quarter guest spot, 0.25 guest parking spots for the dwelling unit. the alternative options that were discussed in the staff report about, not having any requirements at all or anything like that. I agree with what Trent is saying. It's require the minimum. Staff can recommend more. Make sure that language is in there. That's what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, I agree with the same.
I agree.
And I believe in the code, there is a relief mechanism if they have an engineer that shows it. Was that right, Trent? I'm just reading it. That there was a relief if they could show that we're asking for too much? Or did I?
Right, no, there's a statement that they can request a variance as long as, I believe you made the 3 points, as long as they don't affect the resident parking, as long as they don't affect parking in the right-of-way, and as long as they don't affect neighboring developments.
But that
But
was
they have, the proof of burden would be on the applicant to show that they would not negatively impact others.
I believe that was just for the loading zone, but I don't know if it is written and we just don't have a full copy of the code in our backup for the parking. Or if that is a variance, they can do that for parking as well.
But I think it was just for the loading, now that you're saying it. I did catch it.
Trent, I have a question while we're looking at this, since you're exposed to this a lot. When I was looking at some of the sites that we had listed on here, like the Blair House, close to my house, different times of the day, seeing how much of the parking or guests they were using. And it's kind of off season now, so I don't know what's the reality of that. But I noticed there was plenty of parking. That wasn't an issue. What I did also notice that there was more of a bike storage issue. And I know we talk about e-bikes or micromobility, and I don't know if you've seen something that's coming just in general to municipalities where you're having to store, people who are in apartments or condos are having trouble storing these items just because you can't leave them outside like a normal bike, or scooter or something like that. Some of them are very expensive. I didn't know if new residential developments are now opening up storage or closets for those.
It's becoming a preference to do so. I don't typically see it in codes unless it's in a downtown environment where there's a traffic demand management, and you're trying to. Sometimes they even lower the vehicular parking, and then increase means to try to increase other modes of transportation. But generally, in suburban settings, we don't see a requirement for it. Just you'll see the actual developments struggle after the fact, though, because they didn't plan for it, and then now the reality of it is a lot of people own bikes, and a lot of people are using scooters and other means. So
Right.
It's not a bad idea, but it's not a common code for suburban areas.
Understood. Thank you.
Councilmember Brandon, anything? No, Vice Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had two more things. There was no weekend study done on the parking study, and I know it was done during hours that people would be home from work, if I remember correctly, like you had morning and late afternoon or evening. But I know on weekends, people are usually home, and now, on Saturdays, we have landscapers, we have deliveries still, so there's a lot going on Saturdays. Do you ever do weekend studies? I'm just like wondering if you have, and you've seen a difference from your weekday studies, and if there's anything to consider there.
We do studies that have a lot more time periods than we did for this study. We actually had brought a much more robust scope to the village a while back, and the village decided not to go with that one. So then, in paring it back, we just tried to find the most important hours.
Do you ever notice a big jump between weekday hours and weekends, or
The weekends
historically?
the weekend usually becomes more of an issue if the residential development is immediately adjacent to commercial, and they have worries of people using the commercial developments, overflow parking into the residential. Gated communities obviously don't have that problem, but that tends to be a relationship to the commercial nearby is usually when the weekend is more important.
Okay, and then my last question, I know for me personally, the parking and having enough guest parking really came to mind because we're, been facing a lot of new development and nowadays everyone's building out, max to the setbacks, the most square footage they can fit in. And, some of these older developments aren't necessarily built out. So did you think when you were doing the study and based on what you see in other municipalities that our code was maybe not current for the type of development that we are now seeing?
There's a lot of, it's not a good answer, but there's a lot of variation in parking. It's unfortunately not an exact science. I guess the good news is, in comparison to the other municipalities around the village, the code is pretty much right in the middle. It's as low as one per dwelling unit in some jurisdictions and as much as 3 elsewhere. So two has it pegged pretty much in the middle. And yes, we only looked at 3 developments and we only looked at them for 1 day. And so, how well does that cover all conditions? There could be some concern there, but the highest rate that we saw in any of the 3 developments was 1.3, not really getting that close to the 2. So I think there's a buffer there.
Okay. Thank you. Then my other comments, kind of more for council too, to consider under the loading, the off-street loading spaces for the variance. I don't know, and Jeremy, please chime in. Do we need to add any language for also like blocking drive aisles, blocking fire lanes? I mean, I don't know if that falls under right of way, but I just want to make sure that everything that shouldn't be blocked is covered in the variance and looked at. Because right now it just says, the parking on the site right away and other properties.
The design aspect, I mean, there's already loading space requirements for commercial, so the code has all the design elements. And anytime there's a variance, it's going to come before staff and the council, and on a case-by-case basis, you'll be able to see whether there's a negative impact of what they're proposing. I don't believe there's a need to beef up anything. The adding the loading space for the multifamily is just adding it for another use, but the concept for a loading space is already in the code.
Right, but for the variance, and maybe Mitty, even you, because it's like more of a legality with variance and what we look at. I just want to make sure the language is in there that makes sure there's things that can't be blocked, like a driveway or fire access, public safety access.
That's a very good question, but I think that's covered in subpart B above right there. Okay. You already have restrictions that apply to loading zones wherever they're located. So that would still apply in a scenario where you're granting a variance to have one. I think that's already covered in your code. Okay. So I think you're clear there that it have to be free of access ways. It couldn't impede parking spaces. That's already there.
Okay, just want to make sure.
And just while I have your attention, the answer to your question on the parking space reduction number that you posed a couple of minutes ago, there is a similar provision in your code in 78-707, which allows the council to reduce the number of parking spaces in the instance of redevelopment or expansion where the parking requirements can't be met. It's a similar process that comes back to you. It's not worded as a variance, but they have to do a parking study and then that comes back to you. So there is a similar kind of process where you can deviate from the parking space requirement.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other council comments?
I'm done.
All right, any public comment? No? All right, council, we need to give staff direction. So to me, it appears everyone's in favor of the proposed code as it's written.
0.25.
Did we have to add anything for Jeremy's recommendation for the staff loading spaces?
So the way I read the alternative options is if we didn't want to do the code as proposed, that we could put in these, the council and staff could mandate it. But did you suggest something else?
Yeah, I think we should put that in there so that way it gives us the opportunity to ask for additional space or two if we feel like, it's just a huge development that one loading space won't cut it. And that'll give us an opportunity to look at it individually.
And you would want that in your code, I'm sorry to interrupt, if you were gonna require that of anyone, you would want that in your code so that it's clear, so nobody can fight you on it not being in your code.
And that's because you're saying the multifamily residential loading is only requiring one space.
That's right.
It's not saying minimum one, it's just saying one.
Right.
So we needed to add minimum and your recommendation.
Right. And I think the other part was, we were gonna put in some language about behind a gated area or behind a secure area for the guest parking. So
Yeah.
those were the two things that I'd like, as long as everybody's in agreement, we
Yeah.
move forward with that.
And but the guest parking, we're gonna, the 0.25 and just leave it as is.
Yeah.
I thought that was great because it was above other municipalities.
Yeah, we used the numbers that we've had, I think, that we came out with those studies and we found somewhere in the middle in it, but it was a little above.
Yeah.
Okay, all
Perfect.
right, thank you. Thank you, Trent, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, agenda item 2, discussion on proposed resolution for use of discretionary funds. Jeremy?
All right. Yep. Discretionary funds were put back in place, I think dating back to 2013, I believe. From time to time, staff has been asked, what the policy is for the use of discretionary funds. While there is no set policy on the use of funds, it was always generally agreed that they should be used for greater good of Tequesta. At the council meeting, staff was asked to develop, at the April council meeting, staff was asked to develop a policy for council to consider. Attached, you have that policy. A few highlights are, allocating those funds during the budget process, the eligible uses that are there, which include community projects, social welfare initiative, cultural and recreational activities, emergency relief, village representation. These uses are all based on a pro rata use, based on the seat and the election time. We did highlight some ineligible uses of the funds and the approval process. The conclusion in section 11, I think, best captures the intent of this policy, and that the village council recognize the importance of responsible stewardship in the management of the discretionary funds and is committed to ensuring that these resources are utilized in a manner that maximizes their impact on the well-being and development of the village and its residents. With that, it's a draft policy. If you guys have any other additional recommendations or recommended changes, we can do that.
Thank you. Council?
I don't have any recommended changes.
Same with me, Mayor.
Yeah.
There's just one I just want to maybe discuss, and it's come up before, and usually most council members will donate out of their own pocket, but when a nonprofit, especially if the nonprofit is not located in Tequesta or even the surrounding Jupiter area, sometimes they come and ask for donations. And sometimes it can get a little confusing, so even in where it says ineligible uses, it says personal gifts or personal donations. And if the whole council as a whole is not donating to a nonprofit, it's just one, sometimes in the past it just got confusing. So, I don't know, if we just want to change the nonprofit to local-based nonprofits, instead of having maybe some of the ones that come that are further away. But that would be really the only change I would.
What section was
So the
that?
nonprofits.
Is it eligible?
Yes.
Section 4.
Section 4.
So I'm not recommending we take away nonprofits, but just specify that they're local.
So I had the same question, but I didn't technically see nonprofits on here. Would that be social welfare
That's what-
initiatives or?
No, it's on here. It's on,
Is it? I missed it.
hang on, I just saw it.
Section 3B, is that?
Well, that's what, yeah, I mean, is that what it would fall under? But because for example, like Lighthouse Art Center, right?
But that's local.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
And Bush Wildlife in Jupiter, but I know historically, like we've,
So-
council members have given, small donations to them.
But like I said, we read through it, we read through it. That was really the nitty gritty that I thought of. Other than that, I'm fine with the way it is written.
I don't know in the past, we've even got the invitation here, the Homeless Coalition, right? They're not local, but they affect in our county. There's also state associations that are around, they could be in Daytona, but they affect us. And I don't know if we've used those dollars for that before. I'm great with keeping them Jupiter Tequesta, But I don't know if we donated to that, items like that, Homes Coalition for one.
I'm fine if you guys don't leave it, or put it county. I don't know. Again, that was just the nitty gritty,
No, I agree. It's
nitpicking.
important to address.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good point.
just nitpicking.
Well, I guess I'll give one more into that bucket of nitty gritty, just getting into it. But so historically, some council members have maybe at Christmas time, like gotten meals for staff, police, fire. Does that fall within one? I just read them all. I guess depends on how loosely you interpret them, but
I would think that goes under like the social welfare
that's what that's the
initiatives.
only one I could kind of fit it into.
That's just really doing good for the community. I'd see that as.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, or see if that is changing our ability to do something like that.
Right, because you want to keep being able to do that.
Yeah.
If your intent is to do that, we'll make sure we can reword it and put in one of these categories to make sure we can continue to do that. I know that's always been a popular use of the funds, and so
Okay.
I don't know that it's clear in here, but I think we can make it clearer, and so that'll help.
Okay.
If that's what you guys want.
But otherwise, I think it looks great.
Yeah, because 3B does say residents.
Health needs of residents.
Oh, health
Food
needs
does
of
provide
residents.
health.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think it's really good. Otherwise.
I had a question on the pro rata use with the up to 50%. I don't want to limit a current council member from being able to like attend something. Because say there's conferences or events and like more of them just happen to land in the first half of the year versus the second half. So would we put something that there could be an approval exception, or how would we address? I mean, because I think this would keep everyone really transparent with what the spending is anyway, so you could see if someone's abusing it or not. But I just don't know how events fall throughout the year and whatnot if we're gonna, limit someone from able to do something
Sure.
after that 50% mark.
To allow a process.
And that might not happen. I don't know. Like, to date, I haven't ran out of my funds ever towards the end of the year. So, it might not ever happen, but how do maybe we put some kind of clause saying that, past that, it could be like approved on a case-by-case basis or something?
Yeah.
So it's not completely limited?
I think that's good, and that actually just made me think of something else, is in that same scenario, and let's say I had an abundance of discretionary funds left and you really wanted to go to this, could I transfer some of mine to Molly if I'm like, I'm not gonna use all these? Like, is that something we should even consider?
I don't see an issue with that. I mean, but we can probably memorialize it if you guys want to.
I don't know, what do you guys think? I think
Yeah.
that might be nice.
Just
It
something
makes
in
sense.
there.
I'm trying
so-
to think how you word both of those. I think like DEER is just application of a process as a filter on its own.
Yeah,
If you-
right.
Who would approve that case-by-case basis?
See, that's what I was gonna.
Staff, or?
Staff, I would think.
I would
Yeah.
think staff, I don't know.
I think the village manager,
I don't think we
Yeah.
want to get too much in the
Okay,
loop
I'll
with
be in the
that.
middle.
Jeremy gets to, you can mediate that.
Yeah. That would be interesting. Yeah.
If I say no,
Right, right.
that would be interesting. You're right.
That's, like you said, it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
The scenario hasn't happened yet.
So just just you guys come up with
Well,
some
yeah,
language to address that, so. And then for the approval process, I mean, this is really nitty gritty, like, are you expecting council to submit a W-9 when we request something? So I know, like, with the chamber thing, like, I'll, send it to staff and be like, oh, can you register me for this, like, chamber event or league event? And, it's nitty gritty, but it says, like, we're supposed to send the W-9, I'm like.
Well, I think so. Lori's telling me that they will chase the W-9s to
You'll
some
do all that
extent, but
stuff.
if you
Okay.
you're going to give to an organization and you reach out to them, you can ask for a W-9, tell them that we are going to need that, prior to issuing that. That would help. But I mean, we'll track them down. Is that right?
That's correct.
Not saying that, like, I personally don't want to. I'm just like, I don't know if I'll remember. Like,
Yeah.
I just,
No,
I
yeah.
don't want to.
No, but you should.
I'm a rule follower, so
Almost
I
anyway.
Then we ask them to.
Just know that we can't give that money to a cause or a group until we get that W-9.
Oh, so W-9's just for, like, if we're donating something, or is that if we're attending an event or something too?
No, not usually for the event. For like if you're
Oh,
going
got
to
it.
donate
Okay.
to a specific cause, we have to make sure we have a W-9 on file before we can send them the check.
So yeah, really
Got
for
it.
issuing payment in any form, yeah, for
Right.
tax, yeah, the W-9.
So the two was, let's see here, it was a approval process for above the 50% of the pro rata. And then I think you were good on no, were you saying no changes on social welfare, just we flushed it out that have the ability?
I think it needs,
Okay.
as far as like, I think Jeremy agreed, maybe it just needs to be a little clearer on however you describe like
Yeah, I think we'd come up with something that just
village, something that benefits the village staff or otherwise.
Yep.
And then Councilmember Brandon had a good point with nonprofits. We want to make it, like, I don't know, how do you define local, or do you make it just county, or what are
Within
the
a
thoughts
X
there?
amount of mileage radius.
You talk about the cause or where they're incorporated. That's what
I
they're,
don't know, I just know most of the time we haven't donated out of the taxpayers' discretionary fund for that. Usually it's, we'll donate, but we'll put it out of our own money. Because most of us try to put the discretionary funds back into the village
Reserve.
itself, if we're not just putting it back in reserve, rather than just throwing it around.
right. You're not, the last day, you're not trying to find somebody to donate to.
No, I'm just,
Nothing
well,
wrong.
just that way, I don't know. Again, I'm just nitpicking, because we were handed it.
Yeah.
I think, like, I know from, like,
Oh my
I
God.
don't, quite honestly, like, since I've been on council, like, I remember one year I bought a bench to put out for the community for a school bus stop, but it's like other years, like, I just, whatever's left just goes to reserve. I don't even know what to do. Like, I just know I didn't spend it all, and the rest is going to reserve, which is where it should go. So,
I guess I'm thinking of things like American Red Cross, like let's say they came through, like that's just such a large organization. Maybe we just put our energy in helping them get donations rather than spending the taxpayers' money on just nitty gritty. Or just leave it.
Yeah, I think the concern with that, like Red Cross, what if we had a fire? And the Red Cross helps a local family
So
here,
just
you
leave it,
know,
just
and so you want to reward them, or if you've got somebody left over, and I think when we start putting restrictions on where they're located or where they were founded, I think it's discretionary. I mean, it's at the council member's discretion.
yeah, exactly. Like,
That's
you
a good
just,
point.
each council member uses their best judgment. And
Okay.
we're all individuals, and, right? So, okay, I agree. Councilmember Brennan, you're good with that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Fine.
Nothing else.
okay,
Well, good.
good. Vice Mayor?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, any public comment?
Yes, we have Marcia Nielsen.
That was interesting. 94 Beechwood Trail, Marcia Nielsen. Just a brief history. Somewhere between 2000 and 2003, the discretionary fund was established for the council. I say somewhere because an extensive search of the document center yielded no mention of this fund being established in ordinance or in meeting minutes. In interviewing both Mr. Bradford and Ms. Watkins and reviewing minutes of meetings between 2000 and 2003, I established there was a budget fund of about $11,000, which was used to fund various programs and projects. All the proposed projects under consideration were discussed at council meetings and voted on. For some period of time, both the individual discretionary funds and the general funds were both in effect. Therefore, some of the contributions that the village gave were in the public and some were not. So in reviewing this particular document before us tonight, I have the following considerations. Section 2, item C, which is the report of the village manager, will that be public and part of the village minutes? Section 3, item B, the social welfare initiatives. This description is vague and very global. Almost any entity could be a support program. There should be some criteria. An example would be programs designated by a global classification like a 501c3. I have a charitable trust. If it's not a 501c3, I can't pull from that trust. Section 4, item A, religious organizations are not mentioned as being ineligible, but political are. Contributing to a religious organization or their programs may be viewed as against separation of church and state. Section 5, item C, approval. Without clear guidelines as to what constitute a valid contribution, the decision of village staff may be arbitrary. Other considerations, checks are issued by the village. Does this indicate to the recipient that the village endorses their project, even if it is stipulated that an individual council member requested the disbursement? This entity could be, the receiving entity could use this endorsement for their own use. Second one, not addressed as conflict of interest. Should a council member be allowed to contribute to a qualified organization if he or she is part of that organization in a prominent position? And what would constitute a prominent role? Would that not be a conflict of interest? It would seem that some projects are no-brainers and everyone would agree to their validity and support them. However, in the present political climate, that assumption is not really valid. Point 4, in addition, these are tax dollars that are being spent without any public input or discussion. It is one individual's choice, not a consensus of the council, and approval by a non-elected official. Personally, I would prefer the former model, and it should be a fund that funds charities only. This would eliminate Section 3, Item A, community projects, like your benches. But those projects should really come out of the general fund. By making this fund for charities only would ensure that all contributions of the village dollars are discussed and voted on in public with public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right, council, anything else?
No.
I guess a question, I mean, are discretionary funds for council is, I'm assuming that's typical in a municipality, or is it not?
Do you want to go?
Go for it, you sound like you're ready.
It's not uncommon. There are many who have policies just like this. It is up to you to craft the policy that you want to operate within. Not all jurisdictions have policies, even if they do have funds, like you all have been operating without formalized policies, I understand it. It is obviously better to have a policy, which is why I believe you're going the way you are. But not all municipalities do have discretionary funds that they use. But they are you certainly can have them and use them. And as you're doing, it's always best to be transparent with guidelines that you're going to operate within. But I wouldn't say the majority. I wouldn't go that far at all. Certainly in Palm Beach County.
The majority do or don't?
I would not say that the majority does have a discretionary fund, so it's not everybody, not a majority.
Just thinking, so if we, like, say we're on village business related, how would there just be a separate fund for that if we didn't have discretionary funds? Like, how would that work for if we're on like official village related business?
Yeah, we'd have to create a line item for that cause still, regardless. I mean, you know, for travel and just like we have with other departments, we have travel and reimbursement. We would create one for a council, travel and reimbursement if we did that in that way.
And then would probably still need some sort of policy to go with that.
Well, you'd probably just fall under our travel policy.
The one that staff has, yeah. So, do we need it? I don't know, just
What's your question?
I haven't been.
well, do we
here
even
long enough to
technically
see what
need
we do.
discretionary funds? Like what?
We'll make sure we.
I like what Councilman Painter talked about. You know, we have to work with staff on a regular basis and showing them some appreciation at the end of the year. That did seem like a nice gesture. But I haven't been here long enough to see what we spend or what we actually need. I know we go to a lot of different meetings and lunches, but again,
But that could be a separate
designated, I mean.
budget item that would maybe just be like council, like strictly for like those kind of things, like conferences, meetings, lunch, where we're
Sure.
representing the village or on village business, but like, do we need discretionary funds for all these other things?
I can go either way. Most of the time, I don't touch mine. There's been a few times I've put a few gifts back into the community that were activities, and they are still there today for the good of the public to use. Other than that, that's all I've ever really used it for. So I can kind of go either way.
I've only used it for the example I gave.
The alternative is very similar to what Marcia said. There's, some cities that have a bucket that of, $10,000 or whatever the number works out to. Anytime something wants to be used, we get a presentation from a group. The council at that point can make a motion as a whole to use those funds for that. That way it's a group discussion. It's not individual discretion. It's the council as a whole is donating to a cause. So that would be an alternative if you guys wanted to go that route too.
But do council members pull from that pool of money for meetings, whatever they're doing?
I think we'd still, if you wanted to go that route, we would just set up a separate travel and reimbursement fund, and then have a pocket of funds that you guys want, if you guys want to do that. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, that's probably how I would recommend we do that, so we can track it.
If the prerogative is get rid of the discretionary fund, I would say get rid of it, not have another bucket that we're kind of pulling and voting on. If that is the goal of the council is to ultimately get rid of it.
I guess I just don't, like, if we can have a separate budget for expenses for conferences, meetings, events, allowable, that are reasonable, like, why, I guess I kind of now think, like, why do we need funds for anything else?
I thought your bench idea was great, and Councilman Banner's gesture was great, but that's not a common thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know, yeah.
I'm sorry, Pat. I was just saying, I like the bench idea that you executed in Councilman Painter's gesture for the holidays, or whatever it may be. But I'd rather just get rid of the discretionary fund altogether, not creating a whole other bucket where we're having a presentation and voting on where the money should go. And just a little note, I'd be a little biased because I don't have any discretionary funds, so I would be at an advantage of receiving this other expense bucket. That would, I don't think it's an issue, but it would open up. Just a disclaimer.
I think as long as there's travel expenses that are available, because, if you go to Tallahassee twice, it's cost you $1,000 every time you go, and so if there's money available that you're using to represent the village, wherever that pot comes from is fine.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
No, because other than that, what would you do with it unless a resident called you confidentially and said, listen, I fell in hard times and can't pay my bills? Well, that's in there for resident well-being. So our policy allows us to do that, but we do lose that ability to and again, it's all public record. So any donations that are ever made, somebody doesn't like it, then they call you out and you don't get reelected.
Yeah.
I just think at some point you have to have personal responsibility.
Right.
Can't be all policy.
Yeah.
I support the discretionary fund. I have a short time here to experience that, but I get the point of it. I've dealt with some other municipalities that do have them, and I believe it's a positive for the council to have that option to distribute those funds where they see fit without a policy and a vote. I think this policy would allow so it doesn't get abused, but within parameters.
The reality is if we want to use it, it's not like this money sits with us anyway. Every time we want to use it, we need to call Sylvina or somebody. So there is a check and balance here in addition to us using our own discretion. Yeah. I think Mr. Bradford wants to see something.
Yes.
Tom Bradford, 44 Chestnut Trail. There's two things inside the concept of discretionary funds. One is for valid municipal purposes where you go to an event or training, conference, etc. That's part. But the other part is the donations to people and or organizations that want something. And so what I want to warn you about is if you were to go back to the way it was when I was manager, the organizations would come to the council and ask for money for the JTA parade, money for the Jupiter High School, Lighthouse Elementary, Jupiter, nonstop, all the time. And the council members used to complain to me, particularly in the 95 to the year 2000 is when they started to get fed up with it, was they can't say no.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's impossible to say no, because they can make a good case for wanting money, but it's hard for you as a group to say no. And so I've always speculated, I mentioned this to Marcia, I just speculated that after I left, the next town manager said, well, let's just go to discretionary, because that way, each individual gets to pick who's going to get a donation. But the other thing to talk about is for the valid municipal purposes, the bucket's great. The bucket works. I mean, if you want to go to a conference in Tallahassee or West Palm or Miami, and it's valid, the village will either pay for it or reimburse you, or a combination of the two. So I'm really mostly trying to warn you about allowing donations to come back where they come in here and you have a difficult time saying no.
Yeah.
That's my main message.
Thank you. I agree.
Sounds like it could be
At least it's in the public.
Have we historically, I mean, since I've been on council, I haven't received like a bunch of requests for donations. I mean,
Never
you've been
gotten one.
here the
It's
longest.
usually
Councilmember
Jupiter
Bowman.
High, Bush Wildlife, and I think there
Yeah.
might have been one other one. But like I said, with my time with previous council members, it's usually we'll donate from our own pocket, but not from our discretionary fund. And each person would donate their own amount from their own personal finances. That's how it's gone in the past couple years.
Yeah, I haven't.
But
Like,
again, that's
Bush-
with that
Bush Wildlife
individual's
might-
discretion to use the taxpayers' money or not. So technically, without a policy, they could have used taxpayer money, and that just, I've heard from residents that gets a little weary, but I've never done that. I've just paid out of my own pocket, something I support personally.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes sense just to limit it to village representation, and whether it's state, what is it, 2,000 now? What do we have?
I don't even know.
I don't even know.
I have
I
no
have
idea.
to look at the budget.
It's 3,000 is discretionary fund.
Oh, man, okay. Yeah, I mean, if the concern is that these funds could be used, kind of on a unilaterally decided basis, then I don't think anyone's gonna argue with, well, I could be wrong, but the village representation is really what we're all talking about. It's getting educated so we can come back to our village and put that stuff into practice. I'm fine if we limit to that. I guess I don't use mine, so I'm just kinda, I don't have a huge opinion on it, other than for that meal, but I think the village representation, we should have that. Because Molly, I know you go to a lot of stuff, Rick, you're
Yeah.
in Tallahassee, I mean, I don't think it's fair for you to have to pay that out of pocket. You might not go if you have to pay it out of pocket.
Right, but just have like one budget line item for that
That's
for
it.
all council to pull from.
But not a, whatever. Doesn't have to, it could be one
That's what
bucket,
you-
or it could be everybody gets $1,000 at the beginning of the year, or however we do it,
But that's all it can be used for.
and that's all it can be used
Yeah,
for.
not,
Because the bucket could get hard if you go to a lot of stuff, or everyone goes to a lot of stuff, and then I suddenly want to go and it's all gone,
yeah,
So I would say everybody gets X amount of money, isolate it to village representation, and keep the pro rata use. But, I mean, if we're concerned about it, if not, I'm fine keeping it how it is either, too, so. I think at the very least, it should be able to be used for that.
yeah, that's what I agree with, because the other stuff I'm kinda like, why, I mean, technically it's
Yeah.
taxpayer dollar, why do we even need to
Does-
have it all on there? And
Does
just
get a
use it
little
strictly
weird,
for village business, village representation.
Yeah, I get the
That's
donation thing a
appropriate.
little bit, because, just to say, a council member's not gonna donate to something that's, the rest of council doesn't necessarily, or the village as a whole does not agree.
Could bring some bad light.
Yeah, I can't even think of an example of it.
Gives the possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Brandon, what are you in favor for? Just keeping it strictly for, village-related business?
Absolutely, village related. At this time, I actually would prefer to keep it, and I don't mind if we lower it from 3,000 to something less. I would prefer at this time to keep it per individual discretion rather than a bucket at this time, from personal experience reasons. And, yeah.
But do you wanna leave on all the other discretionary items, or just strictly keep it just
For
village
me, as long as
business?
it's village related, I mean, if there's an incident in the village, for example, I put a little library in the village. That was for a community effort. It's for me, if it's for the good of the public, a bench for the bus stop, if it's for the good of the public, I'm okay with that. If it's a personal project for one resident, I mean, that's a little iffy. I know when we had a fire, our whole community rallied together. It didn't fall on one council member's shoulders to find taxpayer dollars. Like, we have a great community for those kind of things, I think. But if it's something like a bench or a library or something for health, safety, or good public use, I'm fine with that, but it has to be in the village.
And, yeah, community.
So I'm not
and
putting
public
something over in
use.
Jupiter or anything
Right.
like that. Or, you know, like just, yeah, I'm sorry, summer.
All right, Councilmember French, you said you are in favor of leaving it how it is right now with
I am.
discretionary. Okay.
Right.
Vice Mayor?
I can go either way if you want to limit it just to village representation, but I don't think the system is broken, so I don't know what we're trying to fix. I mean, we're all accountable. I mean, I made 4 donations last year to Tequesta-based nonprofits that's been memorialized somewhere. So, I mean, I'm willing to stand behind any decision I make and explain why I make it. If people don't like that, then they don't reelect us. You know, but I don't think the system is, I think we're trying to find something that's not broken yet, unless it's been broken in the past. Again, I'm only 15 months into this, so if it has been an issue in the past, I heard somebody talk about a personal experience, and maybe something happened, and these funds should be highly scrutinized. I don't know.
So
Well,
when I say that, the reason why I think it should be based per individual is, for me, that's a better accountability and organization system to see who is maybe abusing the funds and who is using them more than others,
Yeah.
good intentions or not. But
Well,
again,
I guess
staff has
it-
to approve them. But we didn't have Mr. Allen in the past either.
Right. And I guess the transparency, and I think you put in your monthly reports, would shake all that out too. Because right now, like, no one knows what you donated to unless someone purposely wanted to know and pulled a public record request, right? So it's really
But again,
not
we didn't have Mr.
transparent.
Allen beforehand.
No, but even now, it's not transparent to the public. They would have to, do a public records
Yeah.
request, because.
I have no problem if it gets put in someone's or monthly report. If someone happened to use funds, it gets thrown in.
Right, so if
manager's
you're doing the
report or
monthly
something.
report, then it'll all shake out there
I'm
from
fine
a
with that.
transparency standpoint. So just leave how it is. Sorry, I feel like it took us down a rabbit hole. But we did get good public input today, which made me think, like, do we even really need this discretionary fund? Like, maybe we don't need it.
So we don't need this policy, or we're gonna leave it the way it currently is with no policy, or do we want the policy?
We want the policy,
Okay.
with I think the adjustments we originally
Yeah.
spoke about.
Yeah, staff uses, or staff food, or meals, pro rata use, other than the travel, or those expenses, we'll keep the pro rata. The transfer of funds, if a council member is out of funds, it can be transferred to another council member. I think that was the majority of ones, unless I missed any. The other one that Lori's reminded me is, and we'll memorialize it in there with the uses, is, at times council have used, when a council member gets a cell phone, we use those funds to help pay for the council member's cell phone, the village issued cell phone. And so, those funds can still be used for that. We'll make sure we memorialize that before we bring it back.
Okay.
You adding that to the policy?
Yeah,
As I said.
we'll bring it back.
Okay. All right. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Stretch it out, stretch it out.
Ooh, you did?
It's not it's a level 2, it's not a level
Oh,
3.
jeez, how'd you do that? Adulting, parenting.
Trying to keep up with my dancers.